Welcome back to State of the Association. I'm your host, Nash Roberts. We'll be back with another full-length episode tomorrow. Today's just another short bonus episode, another segment. And this today is about the Phoenix Suns. Currently, they have a 7-1 record. Very good team out west. And their roster has not changed substantially since last year. Bradley Beal has been a little bit more healthy, but in terms of his production, it hasn't been that great. KD and D-Book, they've been great, but that's to be expected from them. Bradley Beal, not so much. He's just kind of trying to get back into a rhythm. But currently they stand at 7-1. And they were a playoff team last year, yes. But there was a clear line between them and the true top teams in the West, which was Dallas, it was OKC, it was Denver, and it was Minnesota. And there was a clear distinction between Phoenix and those teams. But right now, Phoenix has a better record than a lot of those teams. I believe they have a better record than any team in the West besides the Oklahoma City Thunder. And once again, the roster hasn't changed much, but I believe that the one X factor is the acquisition they made at the point guard position. They brought in Tyus Jones, and I think that was a huge move for them. And it goes back to the core big three of this team. That is Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, and Bradley Beal, at least on paper, because Beal ain't been living up to that. But on paper, the big three is all score-first guys, no proper facilitator. So last season, and credit to Devin Booker, he did great in this role, but they had Devin Booker, traditionally a shooting guard, they had him play the one. And credit to him, his assist numbers are up. He did good in his role as a point guard. However, Devin Booker is not a true point guard in any sense of the word. And as a result, I feel like his value as an overall player and his impact on actually winning for the Suns, despite playing the role that he needed to, I think the Suns would have been better had they had a proper point guard and then allowed D-Book to just stay at the two. And that's what they're doing this year, because they bring in a guy like Tyus Jones, and the numbers aren't flashy. His season high so far is 15 points, but he's put up a lot of assists. He's getting the ball to the guys that need it, the guys that are going to be score first, in Devin Booker, in Kevin Durant, and to an extent Bradley Beal, which is exactly what this team was missing last season. I think the addition of a true proper point guard can really elevate this team to the next level, because you don't have to rely on a guy like Devin Booker to take away a little bit of the scoring aspect of his game to be a facilitator. No, you allow him to focus on his bread and butter. Instead of point Booker, you got traditional shooting guard, scored 70 points in a game one time, Devin Booker, one of the best shooting guards in the entire league, if not the best. As for the ceiling of this team, I don't see them as a contender at this point in time. If they continue to stretch over the remainder of the season, and especially if Bradley Beal gets back on track, we can have that conversation. But I've said previously, I think the top four teams in the West are the only true contenders. I think there are four contenders in each conference. And in the West, that's Oklahoma City, that's Denver, Minnesota, and Dallas. And I didn't really consider Phoenix as a team that was on par. So for them to have a 7-1 start, that's really impressive. And I think it just comes down to the point guard position. They without doubt solved their biggest issue. And I think it really should lead to a wider conversation in the bigger NBA market, in the bigger league, in terms of how other teams should construct their roster. Because as the years go by, it seems like we stray further and further away from the traditional point guard. You've got Jokic, a center, essentially being the point guard for the Denver Nuggets. And there's a huge abundance of point forwards, like a guy like LeBron James, or Ben Simmons back when he was a little bit better of an NBA player, more impactful. Guys like that, Kate Cunningham, LaMelo Ball, those are really tall point guards to be playing that one position. And then aside from just archetype, aside from height and general position, like obviously Ron is typically a small forward, Jokic, position-wise, he's just a center, and a guy like Cade and LaMelo, they're great passers, but maybe their height is more suited for being a 2 or a 3. However, just because of their elite playmaking, they get to be the one. However, there's also the archetype of point guard that has changed. And that is that so often now they have more of an emphasis on scoring. And I think the best example of this is in the debate between who the greatest point guard of all time is. And that is between Steph Curry and Magic Johnson. Magic Johnson, quintessential point guard. Like Cade, like LaMelo, he is on the taller end. But at the end of the day, he is going to facilitate the ball to his guys first and foremost. He only averaged 19 points a game over his entire career. But he also shifted in about 12 assists, so it evens out a little bit, you know? And then a guy like Steph Curry, he puts a lot more emphasis on scoring the ball. And as well, he also plays a lot more off-ball. He's got the famous Steph Curry gravity, right? Where he can draw defensive attention whether he's on the ball or whether he's off it. Because you've always got to look out for the threat of Steph Curry to shoot the ball. And so you've got all these score-first point guards now. Now, at that position, they're typically going to be good playmakers too, but it seems so often now they put more of an emphasis on the scoring load. A guy like D'Angelo Russell, I think he's a great facilitator, but he also, despite being inefficient at times and inconsistent at scoring the ball, he does put an emphasis on scoring. And sometimes that can harm him because he's always been a really good passer. However, sometimes he takes a little bit too many shots and he's not always efficient with it, and it can decline his performance. So I think he's an example of kind of the negative end of that. I think D'Lo's a great player, but he can take a few too many shots sometimes when he's already on just kind of a cold streak. And I think that inconsistency does come as a result of having the primary ball handler shoot the ball more. You know, back in the old days, we had guys like, John Stockton, who John Stockton's role was to facilitate that Utah Jazz offense. And you can make an argument about that being so heliocentric that really it's not designed for winning, designed to be really successful. But hey, the numbers, at least in terms of assists, John Stockton was second to none. He leads the NBA all-time in total assists by a pretty big margin. And I think he's going to hold on to that record forever because of the evolution of the point guard position, because point guards are going to be asked to score more than Stockton did and asked to play make less a little bit than Stockton did. So I think the evolution of the point guard position has really changed. But my point with all of this is I still think there's room for a traditional point guard in this league. Because we're seeing it with a guy like Tyus Jones, who is leading the Phoenix Suns with not a much changed roster, who were the 5 seed in the West last year, to a 7-1 start to the NBA season. Lonzo Ball coming back after a couple of years of just being sidelined. He comes back and he doesn't put up the best counting stats, but he has been impactful for the Chicago Bulls. Tyrese Halliburton, while he obviously scores a lot more than Tyus Jones or Lonzo Ball, he was the primary mover of that Indiana Pacers fast-paced offense that made it to the Eastern Conference Finals last year. So the pass first, and especially stable point guard is what I want to point out here, and Tyrese isn't the best example of that, but a guy like Tyus Jones, a guy like Lonzo Ball, a guy like Mike Conley as well for the Minnesota Timberwolves. I talked about D'Lo earlier and how D'Lo, just with his scoring, he's a talented scorer, sure, but sometimes the shots just don't go in. And that can be a detriment to him because he's going to put the shots up. But a guy like Mike Conley, he comes in for Minnesota Timberwolves. And yes, maybe a guy like Naz Reid hadn't quite developed the same way when he was playing with D'Lo as he had a year later. He had some more experience with Mike Conley. So that team in general did improve. But with Mike Conley, the Timberwolves, they turned things around. Go from a play-in team to a top seed in the West. And Mike Conley, his counting stats might not be as impressive as a guy like D'Angelo Russell. However, his impact on the game is equal, if not better, especially for raising a ceiling. I think D'Lo's a great floor raiser. I like him as a player, and you can see his level of floor raising back when he led that Brooklyn Nets team so many years ago. However, as a ceiling raiser, I think the stable point guard can really do wonders for that. Mike Conley showed that with the Timberwolves, and that's the real sustained success that we've seen because we had a longer sample size with that than we did with a guy like Tyus Jones. But I think with the way the Suns are playing right now, especially since Bradley Beal's off to a bad start, I think it's sustainable because KD and D-Book are playing really well, and they consistently have good seasons. And Bradley Beal, if he gets things back on track, that's going to be another plus for them. And Tyus Jones is going to be able to facilitate it to all of them, and I think that's huge. So I think Tyus Jones, and the way he's leading this Phoenix Suns team right now, is a great example of how the traditional point guard can still thrive in the modern league and be an X factor for a team. Despite, the rise of the tall point guards, the rise of Nikola Jokic playing center for the Denver Nuggets, but also running the point and being a primary facilitator for that team. And that worked for Denver, right? They won a championship with Jokic, and he's one of the best big men of all time, one of the best passers we've ever seen. And that's the thing. Jokic, I believe, is kind of more of an exception because he's one of the best passers of all time at this point. It's kind of like the Warriors or Celtics in terms of winning a championship, living and dying by the three, because you just have, with the Warriors case, you have arguably the two greatest shooters of all time. You can live and die by the three, and then other teams like the Houston Rockets, they try to replicate that. It didn't quite work out. They missed 27 straight and blew a lead to the Warriors. So I think Jokic is kind of more of an example of an exception. And I think the traditional point guard is really being able to carve out a role in the modern NBA as a ceiling raiser. Not quite the floor raiser. That's going to be more of the scoring archetype. But in terms of bringing real championship value, I think this facilitator has a great spot in the league. And Mike Conley exemplified that last year. And Tyus Jones is exemplifying that this year. They are the real X factors. And that is all for today's episode of State of the Association. Thank you for listening. We'll be back tomorrow with a full-length episode as opposed to just one real segment. Thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Nash Roberts. This has been State of the Association.